I offered my seat on the bus. My feminist granddaughter shouted, "Stop pretending you're a hero." The bus lurched forward with a tired groan, packed tighter than usual, the air thick with the smell of damp coats and exhaust sneaking in through cracked windows. I was seated near the middle, holding the metal pole with one hand, my knees angled slightly because space had become a luxury none of us could afford that morning. My granddaughter stood beside me, earbuds dangling around her neck, arms crossed, her posture rigid in that familiar way she adopts in public spaces, alert, guarded, as if the world itself was something to confront. At the next stop, the doors hissed open and an elderly woman stepped on. She moved slowly, carefully, one hand gripping the rail, the other clutching a worn handbag to her chest. Her hair was grey and thin, her coat too light for the cold, her eyes scanning the bus with quiet uncertainty as she searched for an empty seat that didn't exist. I didn't think. I never do in moments like that. I shifted forward, pressed my palm against the seat, and stood up. "Please," I said, gesturing gently, "take my seat." The woman looked relieved, her shoulders lowering just a little. She smiled at me, a small, tired smile that carried more gratitude than words ever could. But before she could say anything else, before she could even step forward, a sharp voice cut through the hum of the bus. "Oh my God, stop!" I turned, confused. My granddaughter was staring at me, her face flushed, her eyes blazing with irritation. Several heads nearby snapped in our direction. "Stop pretending you're a hero," she said loudly. "This is so performative." The word hit the space between us like something thrown. Performative. I froze, half standing, my hand still hovering near the seat. The elderly woman hesitated, suddenly unsure, her smile fading as she glanced between us. The bus slowed again, rocking slightly, as if even it sensed the tension that had settled inside. "What?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. "You don't need to make a scene," my granddaughter continued, her tone sharp, almost rehearsed. "Offering your seat like that, in front of everyone. It's not kindness, it's virtue signaling." The bus went quiet in the way public places do when strangers pretend not to listen while listening to every word. I felt eyes on my back, on my hands, on my face. The metal pole felt colder now, slick with sweat. I started. "You were just trying to look good," she interrupted. "Like you're some kind of moral example." The elderly woman shifted awkwardly, tightening her grip on her bag. "It's okay," she murmured softly, as if apologizing for existing. "I can stand." "No," I said instinctively, turning back to her. "Please, sit." But the moment had already been poisoned. My granddaughter let out a short, humorless laugh. "See, this is exactly what I mean. You're centering yourself, making it about you." I felt something tighten in my chest, not anger at first, but disbelief. I had offered a seat. That was all. A reflex older than thought, learned long before words like performative ever existed in my vocabulary. "I'm not making anything about me," I said quietly. "I saw someone who might need to sit. And you decided you'd be the one to save her," she shot back. Classic. A man sitting across the aisle stared hard at the floor. A young woman near the window bit her lip, glancing at the elderly woman, then away. No one spoke. No one intervened. The elderly woman finally shook her head gently. "It's really fine," she said again, her voice thin. "I don't want to cause trouble." That sentence landed like a weight. Cause trouble. I lowered myself back into the seat slowly, the motion feeling heavier than standing had. The woman moved a few steps down the aisle, gripping the rail as the bus jerked forward again, now forced to remain standing despite the ache I could see in her posture. My granddaughter looked satisfied, as if something important had just been corrected. I stared straight ahead, my reflection faint in the darkened window, barely recognizing the man looking back at me. In the span of a few seconds, a simple act I had done my entire life, without applause, without thought, had been recast as ego, manipulation, theater. And as the bus rumbled on, filled with strangers who had just witnessed my quiet humiliation, one unsettling thought settled in my mind. If offering a seat is now seen as pretending to be a hero, what does that make basic kindness in a world like this? The bus kept moving, but time seemed to slow inside my chest. I sat there stiffly, my hands resting on my knees, staring at the advertisement peeling off the window across from me. I couldn't bring myself to look at my granddaughter. I didn't trust what I might see there: disappointment, judgment, or worse, satisfaction. Around us, life continued with forced normalcy. Someone scrolled on their phone. Another passenger adjusted their backpack. A child whined softly near the front. Yet I could feel it, the awareness that the moment hadn't passed. It had only been buried under politeness. I was being watched. Not openly, not cruelly, but quietly, the way strangers observe a public discomfort without wanting to be part of it. I had become something awkward in the shared space of that bus. A disruption. A lesson. My granddaughter leaned against the pole beside me, arms crossed, jaw tight. She stared straight ahead, as if daring anyone to challenge what she had just said. No one did. That silence pressed down on me harder than her words. I thought about standing again. Thought about insisting. Thought about saying something, anything, to reclaim the moment. But the damage had already been done. The woman I had offered my seat to stood a few feet away now, swaying slightly with every stop, her eyes fixed on the floor. I had meant to help her. Instead, I had made her uncomfortable. That realization hollowed me out. The bus stopped again. More people got on. The aisle grew tighter. The woman reached for another pole to steady herself, her fingers trembling just slightly. I noticed things like that. I always have. Years of paying attention don't disappear just because the world decides to reinterpret them. My granddaughter finally spoke again, her voice lower now, but still sharp. "You don't get it," she said. "Doing stuff like that puts pressure on people. Especially women. It creates this expectation." I turned my head slowly, meeting her eyes. "What expectation?" I asked. "That they're weak. That they need help. That men are supposed to step in." Her words were confident, polished. They didn't sound like something formed in this moment. They sounded borrowed, repeated enough times to feel like truth. "I offered a seat," I said. "Not an opinion." She scoffed. "You don't see it because you don't have to live with the consequences." I felt something stir then. Not anger. Sadness mixed with a quiet disbelief. "Consequences," I repeated. "For sitting down? For being framed as someone who needs saving," she replied. "For being part of a system that glorifies men for basic decency." I glanced back at the woman again. She didn't look glorified. She looked tired. Invisible. Reduced to a concept in a debate she never agreed to join. "She didn't ask for this conversation," I said softly. My granddaughter shrugged. "Neither did I. But here we are." The bus jolted as it turned a corner. Someone stumbled and cursed under their breath. Still, no one said a word about us. The quiet felt deliberate now, a collective decision to let the moment pass without intervention. That, too, felt like a judgment. I began to understand something unsettling. This wasn't about what I had done. It was about what my action represented in her mind. a symbol she felt obligated to dismantle. And I had just happened to be standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. I had raised children. I had worked my entire life. I had learned when to speak and when to listen. But nothing in my experience had prepared me for being publicly corrected by someone who saw my kindness as performance. When the bus finally slowed near our stop, I stood up again, not to offer my seat, but because it was time to leave. My legs felt heavier than usual as I stepped into the aisle. As I passed the elderly woman, I leaned slightly toward her and spoke quietly, so only she could hear. "I'm sorry," I said. She looked up at me, startled. Then she smiled, not awkwardly, not defensively, but kindly. "You don't need to be," she replied. "I know why you did it." That single sentence undid something inside me. I nodded, unable to speak, and moved toward the door. My granddaughter followed behind me, her expression unreadable. As we stepped off the bus and the doors closed behind us, cutting off the hum of strangers and judgment alike, the cold air hit my face. And with it came a realization I hadn't expected to reach so quickly. In public now, intention doesn't protect you. Kindness doesn't speak for itself. And being misunderstood can happen faster than being heard. I walked beside my granddaughter in silence, knowing this moment on the bus was not over. It was only beginning. We walked side by side down the sidewalk, the noise of the street filling the space where words might have been. Cars passed, people hurried by, and life continued with the indifference it always has to private conflicts. My granddaughter walked a step ahead of me, her shoulders tight, her pace quick, as if distance itself could settle what had just happened. I let her walk. My mind drifted backward, far from the bus, far from the accusation that still echoed in my ears. I found myself thinking about who I had been long before I was anyone's grandfather. Long before my gestures could be analyzed or reframed. I was raised in a small house where kindness was practical, not philosophical. You helped because you could. You stood because someone else needed to sit. No one clapped. No one accused. It wasn't virtue. It was routine. My father taught me that without ever saying it out loud. I watched him give up seats, carry bags that weren't his, open doors without pausing to check who was watching. He never talked about being good. He just did good things in the quiet spaces between conversations. That's where I learned it. Not from books. Not from movements. From observation. When I was young, I took buses like that every day. I remember being exhausted after long shifts, my legs aching, my back tight, and still standing up when someone older got on. Not because I felt noble, but because it felt wrong not to. The idea of staying seated never crossed my mind. Over the years, that instinct never left me. I carried it into my marriage, into fatherhood, into the way I moved through the world. Small gestures, unremarkable acts, the kind you forget as soon as you do them, until someone tells you they mean something else. As we walked, I studied my granddaughter from behind. She was strong, confident, unapologetic. I admired that in her, even now. I always have. But I also saw how tense she was, how alert, as if every public space were a potential confrontation. That worried me. Living that way looks like strength from the outside. From the inside, it must be exhausting. I wondered when the world had taught her that kindness needed to be interrogated. That intentions were suspicious by default. That helping could be harmful simply because of who was doing it. She finally slowed, stopping near a crosswalk. I stopped beside her. We waited for the light to change, standing shoulder to shoulder in silence. "You didn't have to apologize to her," she said suddenly, not looking at me. "I wasn't apologizing for offering the seat," I replied. "I was apologizing for what the moment became." She exhaled sharply through her nose. "You're still missing the point." "Then help me understand it," I said. She hesitated. "It's not about you as a person. It's about patterns. About how men get praised for things women are expected to do without recognition." I nodded slowly. "And where does that leave the woman on the bus?" She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "She didn't ask to be part of a lesson," I said. "She needed a seat." That was the entire reality of the moment. The light changed. We crossed the street. She didn't answer right away. "Intent doesn't erase impact," she said again, like a shield. "And impact doesn't erase intent," I replied quietly. She stopped walking and turned to face me. For the first time since the bus, her expression wasn't angry. It was frustrated. "You keep personalizing this," she said. "I'm talking about systems. And I'm talking about people," I said. We stood there, the noise of the city rushing around us, 2 generations locked in a gap neither of us had chosen. "I've lived my whole life as a person," I continued, "not as a symbol. When you reduce me to one, you stop seeing me." She looked away, jaw clenched. "I'm not trying to erase you," she said. "But you did," I replied. "On that bus." The words hung between us, heavy but honest. She didn't respond. Instead, she started walking again, faster this time. I followed, my steps slower, my thoughts heavier. For the first time, I began to understand that this conflict wasn't about a seat. It was about whether there was still room in the world for quiet kindness, or whether every act now had to justify itself before being allowed to exist. That night, after we parted ways, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. Patterns, systems, impact. They echoed in my mind as I sat alone in my living room, the television murmuring in the background, ignored. I tried to understand not just what she had said, but where it came from, because people aren't born seeing the world as a battlefield of symbols. They're taught to see it that way. My granddaughter hadn't always been like this. When she was younger, she used to sit on the floor at my feet and ask questions that came from curiosity, not accusation. She wanted to know how things worked, why people did what they did. She listened. She absorbed. She laughed easily. Somewhere along the way, that openness hardened. I had watched it happen in pieces. The language changed first. Words that didn't belong to childhood or family dinners started appearing in her vocabulary. Performative, centering, systemic. She used them confidently, like tools, sharp ones. Then the posture followed. The way she held herself in public. Alert, defensive, as if she were always preparing to intervene, to correct, to call something out before it could cause harm. I don't doubt her intentions. She wants the world to be fair, safer, more just than the one she inherited. That desire didn't come from nowhere. It was shaped by what she read, what she watched, what she was praised for online. A culture that rewards confrontation more than understanding. That treats hesitation as complicity. In that world, silence is guilt, and kindness from the wrong person is suspect. I thought about the hours she spends scrolling, absorbing stories stripped of context, moments frozen in outrage and shared thousands of times. Each one reinforcing the idea that the smallest gesture can hide something sinister. That meaning matters less than interpretation. If that's the lens you learn to see through, then my action on the bus wasn't harmless. It was evidence. And I was no longer her grandfather in that moment. I was a representative, a data point, a reminder of something she believed needed to be challenged. What saddened me wasn't that she questioned me. It was that she didn't question herself. She never asked why I stood. She never asked how the woman felt. She never asked whether there could be more than one explanation for a single act. The framework she carried didn't leave room for that. I wondered how heavy that framework must be. To walk through life constantly scanning for violations. To feel responsible for correcting the behavior of strangers, even family, before harm could spread. That isn't empowerment. It's vigilance. And vigilance, when it never rests, becomes exhaustion. I sat there, the room dim except for the light of a lamp, and felt a strange mix of pride and grief. Pride that she cared enough to speak. Grief that caring had taught her to speak in accusations instead of questions. I realized then that this wasn't a disagreement I could win with logic. You don't argue someone out of a worldview they didn't reason themselves into. Especially one reinforced daily by applause. And that left me with a choice. I could keep defending my intentions, explaining my past, proving my humanity every time it was questioned. Or I could accept that I don't need permission to be kind, even if that kindness is misunderstood. As I turned off the lamp and sat in the quiet, one thought settled in with uncomfortable clarity. If every good deed now has to pass an ideological test before it's allowed to exist, then the real casualty isn't tradition. It's trust. I kept seeing her face. Not my granddaughter's, the woman on the bus. The way her shoulders tightened when the attention turned toward her. The way she instinctively apologized for something that was never her fault. The way she faded into the background of a debate that claimed to be about people like her, yet never once included her voice. She had been the reason I stood up, and she had been the first to disappear. That realization stayed with me as the days passed. It followed me through routine moments, waiting in lines, riding elevators, sitting in cafes. I began noticing how often kindness happens quietly, and how quickly it can be disrupted when someone decides to reinterpret it. I wondered what that woman had felt when she got off the bus. Embarrassed, maybe, or relieved to escape the attention, or simply tired of being spoken about instead of spoken to. I imagined her telling someone later about the strange moment when an offer turned into an argument, and how she probably left out the details, choosing not to relive the discomfort. People do that when they're used to shrinking. The more I thought about it, the clearer something became. She wasn't just collateral damage in that exchange. She was erased. My granddaughter had spoken loudly about protecting women, yet in doing so, she had stripped one of agency. The woman wasn't allowed to decide whether the seat offended her. She wasn't allowed to accept or decline without pressure. Her reality was overwritten by theory. That contradiction troubled me deeply. I've lived long enough to know that real people rarely fit into neat ideological boxes. They carry their own histories, limitations, preferences. Some want help. Some don't. Most just want the freedom to choose without being turned into an example. That woman on the bus had been denied that choice. Not by me, but by the argument that followed. I thought about all the times in my life I had been helped without asking. Times when pride would have kept me standing if no one had offered. Times when a small gesture made a long day bearable. None of those moments felt oppressive. They felt human. I also thought about the times I had declined help, and how grateful I was when the offer came without judgment either way. That's the difference, I realized. Kindness doesn't demand gratitude. It doesn't punish refusal. It simply offers. What happened on that bus wasn't a correction of injustice. It was a hijacking of a moment that didn't belong to the argument imposed on it. And for the first time since it happened, I felt something shift inside me. Not defensiveness. Resolve. I couldn't control how my granddaughter interpreted my actions. I couldn't rewire the frameworks she carried. But I could be clear with myself about who I was, and who I wasn't. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't making a statement. I wasn't seeking validation from strangers on a crowded bus. I was a man who saw another human being standing when I was sitting, and chose to stand instead. If that simplicity no longer fits the world's preferred narrative, then perhaps the narrative is what needs questioning. And somewhere out there, I hoped that woman remembered at least one thing from that uncomfortable ride. That someone stood up for her, even if the world didn't know how to sit with that anymore. The next time I rode the bus alone, I noticed how different everything felt. Not the seats. Not the noise. Not the familiar rhythm of stops and starts. What had changed was me. I was more aware, not in the healthy way that comes with experience, but in the brittle way that follows public embarrassment. I watched myself, my hands, my posture, my instincts. At one stop, a young mother boarded with a stroller. People shifted, some pretending not to see her, others glancing quickly before looking away. I felt the familiar pull to stand, to make space, to help without asking. And for the first time in my life, I hesitated. That hesitation scared me. It wasn't born from disagreement. It came from fear. Fear of being misread, called out, turned into a lesson again. Fear that another ordinary moment could spiral into accusation. I hated that something so small had managed to lodge itself so deeply inside me. I stood anyway. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just enough to slide out of the seat and create room. No one said anything. The mother smiled quietly and adjusted the stroller. Life continued. No outrage. No lecture. No eyes burning into my back. And yet, the hesitation lingered. That's the part people don't talk about. How public shaming doesn't just punish one moment. It rewires the next 100. I realized then how easy it is to train kindness out of people. Not through cruelty, but through suspicion. Through the suggestion that good intentions are secretly selfish. That help is only acceptable when it comes from the right person, in the right way, under the right conditions. That realization made me uneasy, because a world where people second-guess empathy is not a safer world. It's a colder one. Later that week, my granddaughter and I crossed paths again. Not intentionally. Just one of those family overlaps where schedules collide. She was scrolling on her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration. I watched her for a moment and saw how immersed she was, fingers moving, eyes sharp, absorbing something invisible to me. I wondered how many stories like mine she consumed daily. How many clips framed as truth without context. How often outrage was presented as awareness. "Can I ask you something?" I said. She looked up, cautious. "What?" "Do you ever worry," I asked carefully, "that in trying to correct the world, we might make it harder for people to be decent to each other?" She frowned. "Decency isn't neutral," she replied. "It either challenges power or reinforces it." I nodded slowly. "And what about people who aren't thinking about power at all?" She didn't answer right away. "They don't get a pass," she finally said. "Not anymore." That answer landed heavier than anything she'd said on the bus. Because it meant the bar for basic human interaction had been raised beyond instinct, beyond empathy, into constant self-surveillance. I didn't argue. I understood then that this wasn't about convincing her. It was about deciding who I would be in spite of the misunderstanding. I would not allow one moment, or one accusation, to make me suspicious of my own humanity. I would help when help felt right. I would offer when offering felt natural. And I would accept that not everyone would interpret that generously. Because the alternative, a world where we sit still, afraid to stand, is not progress. It's paralysis. A few days later, I asked my granddaughter to meet me for coffee. She didn't look surprised when I suggested it. Maybe she'd been expecting it. Or maybe, like me, she felt the unfinished weight of the bus ride hanging between us, unresolved and quietly corrosive. We sat across from each other in a small cafe near the park. The place was busy but calm, filled with the low murmur of conversations that didn't involve moral judgments or raised voices. Steam rose from our cups. Outside, people passed by without knowing who we were to each other. Just another old man and a young woman sharing a table. I appreciated that anonymity. "I'm not here to argue," I said first. "And I'm not asking you to change what you believe." She watched me carefully, as if waiting for the trap. "I just want to understand something," I continued. "When you said I was pretending to be a hero, did you really believe that?" She hesitated, stirring her coffee slowly. "I believed the action fit a pattern," she said. "Men being praised for basic decency, turning kindness into performance." "I wasn't praised," I replied gently. "I was interrupted." She looked up at me, then away again. "I didn't mean to embarrass you," she said. "But moments like that matter. If no one calls them out, they keep happening." "And what happens," I asked, "to the people caught in the middle?" She frowned. "What people?" "The woman on the bus," I said. "Me. You." She leaned back slightly, arms crossing, the familiar posture returning. "Discomfort is part of growth." "Whose growth?" I asked. The question hung there longer than either of us expected. "I've spent my life," I said slowly, "helping without applause, without recognition, without expecting anything in return. And suddenly, I'm told that unless my actions meet a certain ideological standard, they're suspect." She exhaled. "It's not about you personally." "But it became personal," I said, "the moment you raised your voice." She looked genuinely conflicted now. Not defensive, unsettled. "I don't want to live in a world where people hesitate before doing something kind," I continued. "And I don't want to live in a family where I'm treated like a problem to be corrected." She stared into her cup. "I don't want to live in a world where harm goes unchallenged." "I don't either," I said. "But harm and discomfort are not the same thing." That seemed to land somewhere. For the first time, she didn't respond immediately with a phrase she'd used before. She searched for words instead. "I guess," she started, then stopped. "I guess sometimes it feels like if I don't say something, I'm failing." I nodded. "And sometimes it feels like if I do say something, I'm failing the people closest to me." We sat in silence, not hostile, not warm, but honest. "I'm not a hero," I said finally. "And I'm not your enemy. I'm just someone who stood up because standing felt right." She met my eyes then, really met them. "I don't know how to hold both of those things yet," she admitted. "That's okay," I said. "Neither do I." We finished our coffee without resolving everything. There were no apologies, no dramatic breakthroughs. But when we stood to leave, something had shifted. Not agreement, recognition. And as I held the cafe door open, without thinking, without ceremony, she paused, then stepped through without comment. That small silence said more than any argument ever could. I thought the conversation at the cafe would settle things. Not fix them, just quiet them. But conflicts like this don't end when words stop. They linger. They resurface in subtle ways, in pauses, in choices you make without announcing them. And for me, the real shift didn't happen in another discussion. It happened inside. I stopped trying to explain myself. That was the boundary. Not out of bitterness, but out of exhaustion. I realized that constantly defending my intentions was slowly turning me into someone I didn't recognize. Cautious, self-editing, shrinking. I had lived too long, loved too deeply, to reduce my life to footnotes and disclaimers. So I made a decision. I would continue to act the way I always had. Quietly, naturally, without performance, and without apology. At the next family gathering, I tested that resolve. We met at my daughter's house for a birthday. The room was full, loud in the familiar way that families get when they're trying a little too hard to be normal. My granddaughter was there, laughing with her cousins, relaxed in a way she hadn't been since before the bus incident. I watched her from across the room. She was still the same person, sharp, confident, observant. But I noticed something new too. A restraint, a hesitation. Not weakness, awareness. As if she was measuring moments now instead of rushing to correct them. When my wife stood up to refill her drink, I stood with her. When she reached the hallway, I stepped ahead and opened the door. No one reacted. No gasps. No lectures. No accusations. My granddaughter saw it. Our eyes met briefly. I didn't challenge her. I didn't justify myself. I simply held the door, the same way I had for decades. My wife smiled and squeezed my arm as she passed. That was all. And in that moment, something settled inside me with unexpected clarity. I wasn't responsible for managing everyone else's interpretations. I was responsible for my integrity. Later that evening, as people began to leave, my granddaughter lingered near the doorway. She watched as I helped my wife into her coat, my movements slow, familiar, unremarkable. "You always do that," she said. "Yes," I replied. "I do." She nodded, almost to herself. "I've been thinking about the bus." I waited. "I still don't like how it looked," she said carefully. "But I don't think you were trying to be anything other than yourself." That was as close to an admission as she could offer, and I respected it. "I never was," I said. She hesitated, then added, "I don't know how to tell when something is just kind, and when it's something else. That takes time," I said. "And listening." She gave a small, uncertain smile. "I'm not very good at that yet." "Neither was I at your age," I replied. She laughed quietly at that, the tension easing just enough to let air back into the room. That night, as my wife and I drove home, she reached for my hand. "You didn't say much today," she said. "I said what mattered," I answered. "And I meant it. Because sometimes growth doesn't come from changing your beliefs. It comes from learning where to stop explaining them, and where to start living them again." The redefinition came quietly, the way most meaningful things do. A few weeks later, I was riding the bus again. The same route, the same hour. I recognized the rhythm now, the familiar sway as it pulled away from each stop. I sat near the back, hands folded, watching the city slide past the windows in fragments of motion and light. At one stop, a man stepped on with a cane. He wasn't elderly, not the way people usually imagine it, but his movements were careful, practiced, as if pain had taught him to move slowly. He scanned the bus, his jaw tightening when he realized there were no seats left. This time, no one reacted immediately. No one looked up. I felt that familiar pull again, the instinct that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't ask permission. I stood up without hesitation and stepped aside. The man blinked, surprised. "You sure?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Please." He nodded once and sat, letting out a breath he'd been holding longer than he realized. Nothing happened. No voices rose. No accusations followed. No one turned it into a lesson. The moment passed the way moments like that used to pass. Quietly, respectfully, humanly. As I held on to the pole, I realized something had changed, but not in the world. In me. I no longer felt the need to brace myself afterward. I didn't replay the action in my head, wondering how it might be interpreted. I didn't scan faces for judgment. I simply stood, balanced, present. Kindness had returned to its proper size. When I got off the bus, my phone buzzed. A message from my granddaughter. "I keep thinking about what you said, about people in the middle. I'm trying to notice that now." I stared at the screen longer than I expected. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reversal of belief. But it was movement. And movement, I've learned, matters more than declarations. That evening, I told my wife about the message. She smiled and shook her head slightly. "She's learning," she said. "So am I," I replied. I thought about how easy it is for generations to talk past each other. How quickly love gets buried under language that feels righteous but leaves no room for grace. And how rare it is for anyone to pause long enough to reconsider not just what they believe, but how they wield it. I still don't believe kindness needs to justify itself. But I do believe it needs room to breathe. And perhaps that's where we meet. Not in agreement, but in restraint. Not in silence, but in listening. Not in calling things out at the first opportunity, but in asking who stands to be helped, and who stands to be hurt. As I set my phone down, one thought stayed with me, steady and clear. The world doesn't need fewer kind gestures. It needs fewer people rushing to explain them away. I've had time to sit with everything now. The bus, the accusation, the silence, the conversations that followed, and the ones that never fully happened. And what I've come to understand is this. Moments like these don't really change who we are. They reveal what we're willing to protect. I didn't lose my belief in kindness that day, but I did lose my innocence about how it's received. I learned that in today's world, even the smallest human gesture can be reframed, repackaged, and judged before it's ever felt. That realization could have made me bitter. It didn't. Instead, it forced me to ask a harder question, not about my granddaughter, not about ideology, not about generations, but about myself. Would I allow fear of judgment to rewrite the way I move through the world? Would I sit still when standing felt right, just to avoid being misunderstood? Would I let someone else's certainty turn my instincts into something shameful? The answer came slowly, but firmly. No, I am not a hero. I never was. And I never wanted to be. I am simply someone who believes that when you see another person struggling, you respond, not with theory, not with performance, but with presence. I don't offer seats to make a statement. I don't help to be seen. I don't stand up so someone else can sit down. I stand because it feels wrong not to. My granddaughter is still learning how to navigate a world that tells her everything is symbolic and nothing is neutral. I don't envy that burden, and I don't reject her entirely for carrying it. I only hope that, over time, she learns what took me decades to understand, that not every kind act is a claim to moral superiority, that not every gesture needs to be dismantled, that sometimes help is just help. If we teach people to doubt every expression of care, we don't make the world safer. We make it colder. So I'll keep offering my seat when my body allows it. I'll keep opening doors. I'll keep choosing to stand, even when sitting would be easier. Because one day, I'll be the one standing when I can't anymore. And I hope the person watching won't be too afraid of judgment to do something simple. Now I want to ask you something. Honestly, have you ever tried to do something kind, and been told your intentions didn't matter? And when that happened, did you stop, or did you stay true to who you are? Tell me what you think. I'm listening.